Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is John Morris. I'm the Associate Dean for Student Affairs at the Perelman School of Medicine. When Caitlin asked me from Alumni Relations about moderating this session on big ideas in small doses, I was thrilled. It took about 1 second for me to say yes. I would say, as the Dean of Students here, I get a chance to interact with students at some point. I'm unavoidable. Most of the meetings I have with the students are under very positive circumstances, of course. This has been and continues to be a dream job for me. Think about it, working in one of the finest medical schools in the United States. I have the opportunity to interact with 750 of the most brilliant and talented medical students imaginable. It's been an absolute honor and privilege for me. I selected 5 students to present, of which 4 will be graduating, actually, marching on Sunday at the Kimmel Center. I understand that you have access to their bios electronically, and I encourage you to read them. It is an impressive group of individuals, for sure. They represent not only superior students of our profession, but they represent what we like to view as Penn Plus. They bring to the table unbelievable diverse experience and excellence way above and beyond. And I know I'm looking forward to their presentations and as well as your perspectives and questions. So first up is rising senior Brad Borman. He served as education coordinator for the student-run University City Hospitality Coalition. Community engagement, giving back to the local community remains one of the hallmarks of our student body. 73% of Brad's matriculating class participated in community clinics, high school programs, and mentoring West Philadelphia youth. Brad saw the light. He'll be pursuing a career in general surgery. That's not why he was selected here. And I asked everybody to give me a fun fact, and his fun fact was he met former President Jimmy Carter, now the oldest living president, actually. And he will present on community health care, an essential part of Perelman. Brad.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. All righty. Can everyone hear me well? I first want to kind of try to run the microphone, so I'm glad you can all hear me. Again, my name is Brad Borman. I want to say hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to come here and spend a weekend with us. I would like to say welcome. I know you've been here, many of you, for like 24 hours at least, but I just want to kind of re-message to you our feeling of gratitude for your support. There's no doubt that everyone in this room is a tremendous pillar for this institution, whether it be through mentorship, kind of contributing to the spirit of this institution here and abroad, and as well as in your financial contributions. So while I speak for myself, I'm certainly not alone in behalf of my student body, my colleagues really, in saying thank you so much for your time and your energy and your support, not only for this weekend, but for the year entire. So again, Brad Borman, I want to talk with you briefly about community health care and my experience and why I think that's an essential part of what we do at this school. I have no disclosures. This is good. All right, I didn't know if people were going to laugh at that. I was kind of like, yeah. In spite of Jomo's glowing introduction, I assure you I have nothing important enough to disclose to you. So, but no disclosures nonetheless. Brief quote. There are a number of communities in and around West Philadelphia that are in tremendous need of service and help. And those can take a lot of different forms and identities. There are groups at this school that serve young people who may be dealing with crisis of identity over sexuality. There are communities at this school that help serve people who are experiencing homelessness. There are communities that help people who may be refugees and are in this country for 2 weeks and all of a sudden are having some kind of terrible abdominal pain and they don't know what to do. And there are communities that are serving everything in between. I'm here to talk with you today about why I think those are important and why I think they elevate the common mission of this school. There's 3 reasons principally why I think we need to really support community outreach at Penn. And the first one that I want to talk with you about today is need. The second is going to be educational opportunity for the students. And the third will be recruitment for our future students. But let me first talk with you about the most concrete one, which I think is need. The numbers speak for themselves. There are 11 student clinics here at the Perelman School of Medicine, and I actually reached out to the leaders of each of those. On average, each of them provide service to about 100 people on a regular basis, 100 patients who come in on at least once a month to be checked in or supported or have their health maintained by these various communities. So even if we undershoot that 100 patient average, that means that there's about 1,000 people roughly who are receiving care because of community clinics run by students at the Perelman School of Medicine. I think the number speaks for itself in saying that being able to provide care for 1,000 people who would otherwise not have eyes on them is pretty powerful. I myself was a coordinator for the University City Hospitality Coalition on the bottom, which serves specifically people who are experiencing homelessness in West Philadelphia. So to take a bit of a deeper dive into one of these communities of need, looking at homelessness and health, there is about, most recent census data in the city of Philadelphia says that there's about 15,000 people experiencing housing instability at any point in time, and with that comes inconsistent medical care. The life expectancy of those people cumulatively is about 50 years old. Broadly in this country, that's the life expectancy in the year 1900. Obviously, this is quite a problem and something that my community clinic sought to address. When we kept statistics on the patients that we saw, in order, top 5 things that we would treat were injury, chronic pain, hunger, nutrition, skin, foot diseases, and infectious disease. These are things that I think a lot of first and second year medical students can actually manage, or at least identify and come up with an intelligible plan to address. So in my experience, the homeless community, the community of individuals who are experiencing homelessness was an incredibly high yield place to train students, which is a transition to my next point. Before I get there though, I'd just like to also say that it's easy to say that you can take any individual from any one of these communities and say, there's an emergency room at Presbyterian right down the street. You know, where I worked, UCHC was right on 38th Street. 2 blocks north was Presbyterian. The question is, you know, what is the utility of these student-run clinics if you can just go to emergency room at Presby, emergency room at Hupp, or any other hospitals in the greater Philadelphia area? And my response to that is to say that really, medicine is only a small part of the care that we offer. I would say that really it's that sense of belonging and sense of identity that a lot of these individuals might feel when they walk into our space. I know for a fact that many of the people that we serve don't get called by their name all week long. And they come into our place, and it's like Cheers. You know, you walk in, and like everyone says hi, everyone knows your name, and I think that in and of itself is a tremendous source of healthcare, and that you can't get at the emergency room at Presby or Hupp. So I think that that's an important part of how we can serve our community. So we talked about need first, the need that exists in the community. Now I'm going to talk quickly about educational opportunity and why this is important for the students to be able to run these community clinics. And I'll say that with a brief story. This is me. I'm not trying to like elevate myself. There was a small video that was shot at our clinic. And this was a shot of me. And what was kind of ironic was that there's actually a story attached to this particular patient encounter. And the short version is this. He came in, I was taking a blood pressure. This is early in my first year, and I was only really getting used to using a blood pressure cuff and my stethoscope to take a pressure adequately. It was loud. There was a lot of bustling. I was trying to like juggle all this stuff and trying to like adequately take this pressure at once. And I got a reading that was a little concerning. It was like 180 over 120. I was like, you know, I don't think I need to be in medical school to know that that's a problem, right? So I took it a second time. I found that it was similarly about 180 over 20, and then I passed it along to the attending that was there, who again confirmed with the third blood pressure that this gentleman was in a state of emergent hypertension. So we asked him, like, are you feeling okay? Have you been walking around feeling okay? And he's like, well, now that you mention it, kind of like my side hurts and I've had this headache. And we're like, oh my goodness. So we ended up calling the emergency room, and he ended up, believe it or not, having just recently thrombosed his renal artery on the left side and was quickly overactivating his RAS system. I'm preparing for like a major board exam right now, so all this stuff is fresh in my head. And so basically, he had quickly gone into this state of emergent hypertension and was starting to manifest some end organ damage. The bottom line is that I will never forget that encounter. I will never forget. As soon as I did this, I realized, oh my God, I can never inadequately take a blood pressure again. Creating this community clinic, where the students are really principally responsible for caring for the patients, I think removes any dilution from the patient care. I think it makes the students principally responsible, and that elevated degree of responsibility makes the lessons that we learn impactful and stick for a long time. I'll never forget this gentleman. I'll never forget that experience, and I'll never forget that confluence of symptoms. And that was just one of maybe 200 patients that I saw on my tongue working at this clinic. Every one of those encounters really stuck with me because I was in charge of it. Need, educational opportunity, and recruitment. So we talked about the people in the community who need a student clinic. We talked about how the present students at Perelman benefit from that clinic. The last thing I want to talk about is the future students who are coming to Perelman, who we want to get to come here because they're stellar and they're going to make great physicians. A student-run clinic is really incredible because it provides an outlet for a bunch of really important talents. It provides an outlet for leadership. It provides an outlet for innovation. It provides an outlet for someone who has been working in the quote-unquote real world for a year, 3 years, 5 years, and they're facing going back to school with a little trepidation. Like, how am I gonna lose that sense of contribution to the world around me? I don't want to do that necessarily. Providing a community clinic gives them an outlet to keep that sense of contribution alive. It gives them a place to put that leadership ability, that innovation to use. It gives them a place to practice patient interaction and keep those abilities, keep that kind of that warm feeling of empathy alive during those first couple years of medical school where you're kind of in a classroom and maybe feel a little bit isolated. So I say all of this. I say that community clinics provide a confluence of opportunities that the best and the brightest recruits that we want to come to Perelman are going to be looking for. So it's important not only to sustain, but to grow those opportunities and then to market them, I think, as saying this is a place where you can have high-yield leadership and contribution to the community around you, which you have already demonstrated and is one of the principal reasons we want you to come here. In summation, need, educational opportunity, and recruitment. These are 3 reasons why I think community clinics are absolutely essential to the Perelman School of Medicine. I'm not the only one who's going to speak to you. I think evidence to why this is so important is the fact that 2 of the other talks coming after mine are addressing that exact thing. So I will pass the mic on. Thank you so much again for your time and energy. We love you guys. We're so glad that you're here. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you around. I don't know if we have time for questions. Is that a question or?
Please, questions.
Just a quick question. Joe Hoffman, University Doc, in Portland, Oregon, in class of '84.
Sure. Nice to meet you.
I've worked with a lot of homeless in ER, and chemical dependency and mental health issues are a huge problem in that population. Have you looked at significant uses of Suboxone and for chemical dependency, things like that?
So my understanding so far is that none of our community clinics are actually carrying or offering naloxone or any kind of emergency rescue from opioid overdose presently.
Suboxone is different. It's for getting
Or versus naloxone. Yeah.
Suboxone is different.
Buprenorphine. Yeah.
It's to get patients off opiates without the horrors of withdrawal.
Sure. So presently, I don't think any of our student-run clinics offer that. That is something that we're all kind of trying to champion and make sure. I think the city of Philadelphia as a whole is kind of pioneering this argument in the country and trying to get prevention points, safe injection sites present in the city. I think that that's a conversation that we're actively having with student leadership here and something that we'd like to see developed. Thank you.
You're about to enter a 5 to 7 year ruling residency, working no more than 80 hours a week, I might add. How are you going to keep the flame alive? How are you going to keep this passion going?
So I'll speak completely candidly. I think everyone who's here has interests outside of medicine, hobbies, passions. For me, I'm aspiring for that to be my family. I'm in a relationship right now with someone who I love very much and who I aspire to create a family with in the first couple years of residency. So I think for me, that'll be my flame. I think that'll be a way to kind of keep that spirit alive. I also think that, frankly, and I'm not saying this because I just talked about it, I assure you, but I think that I want volunteer work in support of local community clinics, preferably run by the students at the medical school where I'm working, to be a part of what I do. Absolutely.
Great. Other questions? Awesome. Good work. Thank you. Outstanding.
Thanks.
Josie Carreras Tartak matched at the MGH Brigham and Women's Hospitals for Emergency Medicine. She is one of 7 students who will be graduating in 5 years with a combined MD, MBA from Perelman and the Wharton schools. In fact, this Sunday, 34 graduates will receive a combined MD and master's degree. The competition for the Perelman Wharton program is intense, and our students are enrolled in the healthcare management major. Josie's fun fact is that she originally wanted to become a musician, was a singer and guitar player in her high school band. She currently is a karaoke aficionado and a professional shower singer. She will present on the MD MBA, positioning clinicians as future healthcare leaders in underserved regions. Josie.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay. That's the Mac to PC compatibility. I assure you that it looked better on my computer. So when a couple of years ago I told my parents, who are here in the audience today, that I was going to do an MBA and take an extra year out, they were like, Josie, are you ever going to graduate? Like, why do you keep taking years out? Like, what are you going to do with an MBA? And I just want to say, sit tight, because you're about to find out as soon as I grab my clicker. So. But first, I want to share a little bit about my home island of Puerto Rico and my motivation for doing an MBA. So if we're talking about underserved regions, the entire island of Puerto Rico is an underserved region for many reasons. For example, we have a disproportionate amount of Medicaid recipients. So whereas in the US, about 1/5 of the population receives Medicaid, in Puerto Rico, that proportion is 50% of our residents. Not only that, but our program is significantly underfunded because we're not a state, but rather a commonwealth. And that means that the federal subsidies that we get from Medicaid are not only on the lower end from a federal matching rate compared to other states, but they're also capped after a certain amount, which means that the effective contribution that the federal government makes to our Medicaid program ends up being around 15 to 20% of expenses. Whereas if we were a state and that amount was supposed to be calculated based on our adjusted gross income per capita, that amount should be closer to 80%. So what this all translates into is really low Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates, which in turn leads to lower physician salaries, which in turn has led to a loss of over 1/3 of our physicians in the past decade alone. And those are pre-hurricane statistics. So you can imagine that in the past couple of years, that number has skyrocketed. So what motivated me to do the MBA was seeing this grim picture of the healthcare situation in Puerto Rico and realizing I could potentiate my impact as a future clinician if I pursued a position within healthcare administration on the island. So when asked this question of, Josie, what are you going to do with your MBA? I had this sort of checklist. You know, I wanted to work on my leadership skills. I wanted to develop my problem-solving skills. I wanted to establish a professional network. And ideally, I wanted to figure out what to do with my MBA somewhere along the road. So I was ready. I was a first-year MBA student, and on September 2017, Hurricane Maria happened. And in the first 48 hours, when we couldn't even communicate with our parents and our relatives on the island, a sense of powerlessness overcame me. And it was that sense of powerlessness what influenced my entire MBA journey. So whereas I had this checklist that I had come into my MBA to pursue, when I think back on my MBA experience, I actually ended up accomplishing all of these things that I set out to do. I just didn't do them in the way that I expected because of Hurricane Maria. So if we talk about improving my leadership and communication skills, in the first 48 hours after the hurricane, the first thing I did was I texted my fellow MD and MBA classmates from Puerto Rico to figure out why nobody was fundraising within the Penn grad community for hurricane victims. And we set up a Venmo account. It's basically like a PayPal, but like you can just text and donate really easily. We set up a Venmo account called Penn Helps Puerto Rico, and we started asking our classmates for donations. And in the first couple of days alone, we noticed that we were getting around $2,000 a day just from classmates giving small amounts of money, and we figured we were onto something. So we also heard about some PhD students from Puerto Rico at the Biomedical Graduate Studies program who were also raising funds for Puerto Rico, and we decided to reach out to them and join forces. And we put together this Penn Helps Puerto Rico campaign, and where my sort of Wharton leadership MBA skills, whatever, came into play was not only coordinating these different groups of graduate students under a unified campaign and figuring out what the long-term vision of where this money would be, but also communicating with the Penn Medicine Administration and securing a matching campaign so that for every dollar that we raised, we would be matched. And that's how in 2 weeks we managed to raise over $54,000 for hurricane relief. And we didn't stop there, we kept going. So another way that I got involved in hurricane relief efforts was by reaching out to the different members of the Puerto Rican physician diaspora here in the US. And I connected with a physician from CHOP, Dr. Silma Ortiz, who had heard about a humanitarian flight departing from Newark International Airport at a time where nothing was getting into the island. The docks were full, FEMA was confiscating everything, and nothing was getting into the island. So she heard about this humanitarian flight, and she had CHOP donate 4 pallets of pediatric hospital supplies, but she didn't have a way of getting them to Newark on time. So her research assistant and I basically rented a U-Haul and loaded these 4 pallets of hospital supplies and got them to Newark on time to be shipped the next day to the pediatric hospital of Puerto Rico. A couple of days later, I got a call from Dr. Ortiz. It was a Saturday, and she told me about this another humanitarian flight that was departing from Newark the next day. Everything had to be there that day at 4 p.m., and they had room for 8,000 pounds of things. And I look around my house, I did not have 8,000 pounds of things to send to Puerto Rico. I looked at my watch, it was 11 a.m., and I was like, I guess I'm not finishing my coffee. So my fiance, who's also here, and we rented a U-Haul. We reached out to a warehouse in North Philly that had been collecting donations from the entire city, and we loaded 4 pallets of food and water that were shipped the next day. We made it on time to Newark, and they were shipped the next day to Puerto Rico. And we kind of kept going, with these basically grassroots efforts. There were no humanitarian flights. I basically, for Thanksgiving break, loaded 3 or 4 suitcases of water filters and mosquito nets and things that you couldn't find on the island, and took them over Thanksgiving break and distributed them with brigades organized by both physicians and members of the community. And it's not like, when I'm talking about improving my leadership and communication skills, I really wasn't doing any of this because I was deliberately trying to become a better leader. I was doing it out of the sense of powerlessness that I felt, and all of us Puerto Ricans felt, at not being able to be there on the island and wanting to help. But I think that being a full-time MBA student served as the perfect catalyst for me taking initiative. First, because I was surrounded by fellow leaders. So the people that get into a Wharton MBA are typically leaders in their own industry and are known for taking initiative. And the other thing was having dedicated time to consider my priorities and actually reflect on what was the most important to me at the time, which was helping my fellow Puerto Ricans. And these are pictures. This is the most successful bake sale ever. If you ever want to host a bake sale, you should host it in the Smilo lobby, because we raised $5,000 in just a couple of hours there, FYI. And those are the CHOP pallets that we sent to Puerto Rico. So then the second thing I wanted to work on was developing my problem-solving skills. And Wharton offers a lot of opportunities to become involved in a lot of consulting projects and advising projects. And these are just 2 examples of them. So one of them was the Healthcare Management Program Field Application Project, which is basically a semester-long consulting project where we as students get to work with a real healthcare company in the US on a semester-long consulting project. And I volunteered to lead that out of a team of former consultants, and me being the only non-consultant on the team. I volunteered to lead that, and it taught me how to structure a project, manage relationships with clients, and manage a team. The other thing that I got involved with was Wharton Global Health Volunteers, and we went to Peru, and we were doing a consulting project on an organization that does women's health, and they were looking to expand their services, and this is us with a lot of indigenous women from the Puno region. We were trying to gauge their interest on different types of services that this nonprofit was considering offering. So then the third thing I wanted to work on was establishing a professional network for myself, ideally in Puerto Rico, but I didn't think it would be possible because, I didn't think that there was a big Wharton community in Puerto Rico. But never underestimate the Wharton network. I met a professor who knew the senior vice president of healthcare delivery at Puerto Rico's largest insurance company, Triple S. And he connected me with him, and I basically convinced this really high executive that reports to the CEO of this huge publicly traded multi-million-dollar company to give me an internship, which is not something that they typically do. But they did it for me. I guess I was pretty convincing. And basically, I got to combine my MD knowledge with the skills, the project management skills I had gathered with my MBA to work on different projects across 3 different business lines, and not only add value to the company and their initiatives, but also to establish a name for myself so that when I could go back to Puerto Rico, even if I didn't want to go back precisely to this company, I could still have a powerful network within healthcare leadership in Puerto Rico that could connect me to the right people. And then, that's me in my office. And then lastly, this whole thing about figuring out what to do with my MBA, I still don't have it all figured out. But what I would say is that what this experience has taught me is that in order to be a good leader in healthcare, you need to understand the needs of the patient population. And I'll end with this story about Mr. Alberto Maldonado, who was one of many Medicaid recipients who had his story featured on a series of NPR articles that came out many months after the hurricane. A lot of these Medicaid recipients couldn't access basic healthcare services. For Mr. Alberto, he was legally blind because of diabetic retinopathy and cataracts, and he didn't have anybody to give him a ride for his medical appointments. Turns out that his Medicaid managed plan was managed by Triple S, the company that I was interning for. And not to say that I directly talked to the CEO of this company about Mr. Maldonado, but I actually did. I talked to the CEO of this huge company and told him the story of Mr. Maldonado, and he was surprised to hear this because he told me, well, I thought our Medicaid plans covered transportation. But what I explained to him was that it's not about covering the benefit. It's about the fact that the process for requesting transportation was so bureaucratic that Alberto wouldn't sometimes not get approved at all or would never hear back on time about his transportation being approved, so he would miss both his ophthalmology appointments and his cataract surgery. So I just this just goes to underscore the importance of having people in healthcare leadership positions who remain connected to the needs of the patient population. And who better to do that than us physicians, right? And Alberto's story does have a happy ending. So although Triple S could not get him the transportation he needed, I found somebody that did, and that person's sitting right here. That person is my mom, and she's the most awesome person I know. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and open the floor to questions. If we have time, yes.
Hi, it was a very interesting presentation. Thank you. And I just wanted to ask you, how does your warden training track with the regular 2-year warden program? Is it the same, or it must not be exactly the same?
Well, it's a year and a half instead of 2. So what they do is they trim a semester off of med school and a semester off of the Wharton MBA, and that way it ends up being a 5-year program. But the good thing about this program is that you are an MBA student for a full year, and then on your last year, you kind of split it between the MD and the MBA. And it works out perfectly still because you get to start classes with your MBA group, which means that you end up being a part of the community, which is one of the primary aims of you doing an MBA, the networking aspect of the MBA. So it does end up working so that you get the most, probably like 90% of the MBA regular experience.
So you could go work for Giant or something like that?
Yeah, I could have gone to McKinsey, but I didn't. Oh no, I'm going to residency. I'm one of the good guys. No worries. I'm kidding.
Josie, so you matched in obviously a great emergency medicine program. Tell me, how was the degree in Wharton perceived by people, interviewers? How much of an interview was dedicated to your Wharton as opposed to you? So
yeah,
in a positive way,
positive.
ambivalent? They were intrigued by this?
Positively, I think it's also because of the shape my MBA took, where it wasn't the traditional type of MBA where you're kind of getting an internship in some big consulting firm. I was kind of going back and demonstrating my commitment to Puerto Rico, so maybe that's why it got so well perceived. But I think, yes, to that point, sometimes the MBA can be, in some specialties at least, negatively perceived as us maybe not thinking of being full-time physicians or we're not taking medicine as seriously. But I think that mentality is changing. And I think with more dual degrees, more specialties are becoming receptive to this.
Who are the other non-MD people in your track? If they're non-physicians, what are they? What are these people doing? Are they going to pharmacy, industry? Are they PhDs?
The healthcare management program, yeah. Well, most of them are going to consulting, and then a lot are going into pharma and biotech companies, the non-MDs. Yeah.
Great. Other questions? Thank you, Josie. Thank you. Shelley Henderson matched at Penn for family medicine. She's a member of our Gold Humanism Honor Society, a very active chapter where admission is by peer election. Shelley was the GHHS chair for community engagement and patient care with the goal to create opportunities for students and faculty to learn from and partner with the West Philadelphia community. Shelley's fun fact is that she was born and raised in Philadelphia. She is a military wife, a mother of 2, and she played a central role in the GHHS 2019 Solidarity Week and will present on this partnership with the West Philadelphia community. Shelley.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm pretty sure you can hear me. Okay, so again, my name is Shelley Henderson. I am the Patient Outreach Chair, or the Community Outreach Chair for the Penn Gold Humanism Honor Society. And we're gonna talk about what we decided to do this year for Solidarity Week. So Solidarity Week is a national thing. It started off when the Gold Humanism Honor Society nationally wanted to have a day in 2011 where they celebrated provider-patient relationships that were based on caring. In 2013, 2014, Senate passed a resolution to officially recognize Solidarity Day on the national calendar. Now we celebrate it as an entire week. So we got together as the brand new executive board for Penn GHHS, and we talked about our events for the year. I heard about the position of the community outreach chair being from Philly. I'm like, well, this is great. It's fourth year. I have a little extra time, so that would be awesome. I did not know that I would be responsible for a whole week worth of activities. That's the moment where I found that out. So we talked about what Solidarity Week was, and as they were explaining it to me, I had an idea. I'm like, well, when thinking about solidarity and when thinking about Penn, I think about us having solidarity with our surrounding community, solidarity with West Philadelphia and what that actually looks like. And when I threw that out there, the entire board was just, let's go, let's do it, whatever you think that looks like, we're all with you. So the questions we were thinking about as we wanted to plan this week: how can we build solidarity with the West Philadelphia community? Can we improve doctor-patient relationships and ultimately patient care by educating students about the history and the culture of West Philadelphia? And how can we get students out into the community and enhance relationships with community organizations and with community members? Ideally starting around first year, so by the time they're in clinics, they really feel comfortable like talking to patients, engaging with patients. And so to do this, we figured we'd have a variety of events. We wanted to have events that got students out of JMAC, as beautiful as this building is, out into the community with community members. We also wanted to invite community members in to share their experience, to share their expertise, in addition to Penn faculty members. So we started that off in the community with a town hall event. This town hall took place at a barbershop around, 44th and Chestnut, called Philly Cuts. Penn already has a relationship with them. The Student National Medical Association, SNMA, goes in and they do cut hypertension at that barbershop. They'll take blood pressures, they'll talk to clients who are there. And so we have a good relationship with the barbershop. And I personally have a good relationship with the owner, Mr. Darrell Thomas. He happens to be my father's cousin. So I'm like, this is great, this will be perfect. So what we did after the barbershop closed, we invited community members, we invited barbers, we invited hairstylists, and we invited med students, residents and fellows, to come and to just have a conversation, to talk about what healthcare delivery actually looks like in West Philadelphia, to talk about doctor-patient relationships, to really hear from community members. And we also took an opportunity, I stressed to everyone, yes, let's talk, let's provide some education, but I just want to talk just a little bit because I really want I want to focus on listening. So we did a very brief presentation on type 2 diabetes and acanthosis nigricans, because who better than your barber or hairstylist to identify a darkened area on the back of your neck? So we talked about what that was. We talked about how to talk to clients and what that could mean. The conversation really did focus on a little bit of a history of West Philly, but heavily on healthcare delivery. I included some clips, but they're really short, so I think we can skip them. But we had a really great turnout. One of the things we also did here, we partnered with the Penn Center for Community Health Workers, and who you see in the picture here, Cheryl Garfield, who is a community health worker I had a chance to shadow when I was on that rotation, and she really kind of just bridged like what could sometimes be perceived as a gap, and it was just amazing to have them there partner with us for that. The other aspect of the week, the biggest aspect of the week, was a series of lunch talks. So we had 4 different lunch talks that took place here at JMAC, and they addressed different topics about West Philadelphia. Invited med students to come, we had some residents and some fellows come over and join us, and we had community members come in, community organizations come in. And we also had Penn faculty members come and talk. The other thing we decided to do, so we have lots of lunch talks here every week. We often use the same vendors over and over again, which is great. We all love often the Thai food and the Indian food that we often have, and the hummus. But we wanted to really promote local vendors and local minority-owned vendors. So we partnered with those vendors. We struggled to get them through the PO process so that future groups could actually support them and we can build those relationships. The first talk we had was on the history of West Philadelphia, so we can understand how Penn has grown in this community, how West Philly has come to be what it is today. So we brought Daryl Thomas back, who was born and raised in West Philadelphia, and we had Mr. Glenn Bryan speak, who is the Assistant Vice President of Community Relations here at Penn. Some of the topics, we talked about redlining, we talked about the Black Bottom, what that was, and we talked about UPenn's perspective on their relationship with the West Philly community. All of these lunch talks had a huge turnout. A big piece of the feedback we got was you need larger rooms and you need more food. It was absolutely amazing. The other thing we hit on was gentrification. So this is a big topic for our students, as you know, most students here are not originally from Philly. And a big issue for patients. So understanding how gentrification actually impacts patients. We had Lisa Quattlebaum, who is the founder of a nonprofit here in Philadelphia that focuses on food insecurity, and especially among minority women. We had Walter Palmer, who is a lecturer at the Graduate School of Social Policy and Practice, amazing speaker. Louis Messiah, who is a filmmaker and former UPenn artist in residence, and Emily Dow, who's the policy director of the Reinvestment Fund. What they were able to provide in that panel was absolutely amazing. I know I personally learned a lot. And then something we talked about, which it kind of caught some people off guard when I recommended it. But I thought we should focus on Islam in West Philadelphia. I think many people who come from outside the city are very surprised to see that we actually have a very, very large Muslim population, specifically a very, very large African-American Muslim population. So understanding the history of that, how it's often rooted in the civil rights movement, and how that was kind of birthed, I think is very important. But also thinking about, let's say I'm third-year med student, male, on the labor floor, and I'm going in to see a patient and I'm stopped in my tracks because of their religious beliefs. Like, how do I respond to that? And even just being prepared for that. So we talked about the history of Islam in West Philadelphia. We also talked about partnering with your patients, understanding and the cultural competency around that. We had Imam Kenneth Nuruddin, who is the resident imam at the Philadelphia Masjid, which is one of the largest masjids in Philadelphia, come and speak. He also does a lot here at Penn. Another talk, our last talk on that Friday was on trauma-informed care. Many of our patients, especially in West Philadelphia, have experienced trauma. And I think just kind of hearing about this, allowing people to ask questions was very important. So we had Melanie Nelson, who is a part of the Northwest Victim Services, come in and speak. Dr. Marsha Richardson, who is a clinical psychologist in West Philly. Dr. Sanhaya Iyengar, who is a developmental behavioral pediatrics fellow at CHOP. And Reverend Dr. Renee Mackenzie Hayward, who is a chaplain for the Church of the Advocate, came and participated on a panel specifically around trauma-informed care, talking about patients, but also talking about how medical providers experience trauma and how we don't often have a space to address that and to discuss it. So that was the part of bringing in the information, educating students. But again, we also wanted to make sure that we were getting people out into the community. So we ended our week with a mural arts tour. I am very, very, very proud of the murals in our city. The largest number, there's a number of murals in the country, and they tell a lot about the history of Philadelphia. So we partnered with the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program, and we took 38 students on a tour of the beautiful murals that we have specifically in West Philly. Being born and raised in Philadelphia, I actually learned a lot on this tour. I had no idea that the mural that has Martin Luther King in it, I didn't know that he actually spoke at that corner, and that's why that mural is there. Blew my mind. But that's how we decided to end our week. I will blow through the feedback. I know we are a little low on time. You'll see most students attended multiple events. This is from a survey we put out. We had 32 respondents. Many of the respondents either agreed or strongly agreed to the statement that they had a better understanding of the structural and cultural factors impacting health in West Philadelphia. Most students agreed or strongly agreed to the statement that they feel better prepared to provide care to patients in West Philadelphia. And I know my time is up. The last one was, do you feel that these lectures, this information should be an aspect of our education here at Penn? And almost everyone strongly agreed to that. So our next steps, we plan on meeting with the administration to talk about how we can wrap some of this information into our curriculum here. We're going to continue some of the partnerships that we started, and we're going to continue to focus on building this relationship with West Philadelphia. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions for Shelley? So I did not grow up in Philly. I grew up in the burbs. Lower Merion class of '75. But I've been around a long time, a little bit before Kobe graduated. And I can remember when it wasn't so rosy. And my sense is it's a very top-down phenomenon. It starts with President Gutman and comes all the way down. But as I see this health center or health system expand, metastasize to, for example, the Presbyterian campus, the entire trauma program in there, and that sort of gets to your gentrification issue. Is that creating any tension in the local community about sort of space encroachment? Is that a good thing? I mean, the more we expand as a health system, somebody's got to move somewhere else.
Yes.
How's that going down?
Well, I think, obviously we're going to expand, but I think there's definitely a responsible way to do it. So I think helping even students to understand that, as we're getting these new developments, as we're building these beautiful buildings, rent is skyrocketing for a lot of people, is leading to increased homelessness, and that impacts health. So understanding that, partnering with patients and really holding our, wonderful institutions accountable to make sure that we are expanding in responsible ways.
Very good. Questions? Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you. Our last two speakers will graduate from Penn's renowned MD PhD program. On Sunday, there will be 14 graduates in this program who will march at the Kimmel Center. The Penn MD PhD program is recognized as the largest program in the country, although every year it's sort of neck and neck with WashU, and certainly recognized as the premier such program in the country. The overwhelming majority of the graduates of this program, 97%, will actually pursue a clinical residency. Most will have worked with a PI focused on bench laboratory investigation, but not all, which brings me to Utpal Sandesara, who matched at UCLA for internal medicine. Utpal matriculated to the Perelman School of Medicine in 2009 in the MD PhD program in anthropology, which means that some of you may actually have been his classmate. He's been here 10 years. Not long after his arrival, Paul co-authored the widely acclaimed book, No One Had a Tongue to Speak, in 2011, an analysis of the 1979 collapse of the Mattu Dam following a relentless monsoon season with a death toll exceeding 25,000. Utpal is a lover of languages and is fluent in Gujarati and Spanish, proficient in Hindi, Latin, and French, and is currently learning Cantonese. He will discuss medicine and the muse, anthropology, writing, and the best MSTP in the galaxy. Utpal.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me in the back okay? So thank you very much to Dr. Morris for that introduction, to Alumni Relations for this invitation, and to all of you for being here. So on August 11th, 1979, after 10 days of unending monsoon rains, a 4-mile-long irrigation dam in an unknown part, relatively unrecognized part of Western India collapsed. As a 30-foot-tall wall of water careened downstream, factories collapsed, homes caved in, huge bridges broke, and lives were changed forever. The death toll, as far as we know, ranges from 10,000 to well over 25,000. One of the reasons we don't know is that while there was a commission of inquiry set up by the government after the disaster to look into why it had happened, the commission was never allowed to come to its conclusions. 18 months into its work, before it could reach a firm conclusion and make it public, it was wrapped up by the government as unnecessary. What I want to tell you today is the story of how we dig into stories like this and how during my time at Perelman, I've had the chance to learn a little bit about how finding stories like this might actually relate to the practice of medicine. So I went into my pre-med studies knowing that I wanted to be a physician author. I always knew that I wanted to bring ideas to people through my writing, and that I simultaneously wanted to have the skill set to heal on a one-to-one basis. So for me, the story of this dam disaster started my freshman year when it spoke to me as a writing project. December of 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami happened, and I saw my mother weep. I had grown up hearing about how she'd survived this obscure dam disaster in Western India, but this was the first time she really opened up about what had happened and what it had been like. So wanting to know more about it, I said, surely there must be something on the internet. So I Googled it. No, I did some library research. Turns out, for one reason or another, even though this was one of the deadliest environmental disasters in history, we didn't have that much about it. So over 18 months, my college roommate and best friend and I prepared to go to India and do field work on this. So we had a chance to spend a summer in India. You can tell that it's 2006 from my unfortunate goatee style. I was also 19, so give me whatever concessions you typically give youth. And we had a chance to interview 147 people who had been survivors, relief workers, and government officials at the time of the disaster, and also to compile about 10,000 pages of archival documents that were related to the Commission of Inquiry's research that had never been made public. And so it's with this kind of corpus of data that I worked through the second half of college and came into the MSTP here. And it led to us finally being able to tell a story about why the disaster happened, what the government relief efforts were like after the fact, what the experience was like for people who actually suffered through it, and perhaps most importantly, what this Commission of Inquiry was moving towards finding before it had been silenced and how it came to be silenced. So if I've intrigued you at least a little bit, this is the one place I'll put in a shameless plug. Our book, No One Had a Tongue to Speak, tells all of this in much more detail. I think it's good. I'm a little biased. But the point is, this book didn't just come to be. As I said, I came with 10,000 pages of archival documents and hundreds of pages of interview transcripts, and now I'm going through renal and cardiology and pharmacology. And I'm like, how am I gonna make this work? And this is where you enter the best MSTP in the galaxy. So some of you may know Maggie Kroll, our program coordinator, and Skip Brass, the program director. And I was worried. Everybody else for the summer between their MS1 and MS2 years was going off into the lab, was going to do preliminary field work, was gonna start doing some kind of research. And I said, yeah, but I have all this research that I've already done that needs to get turned into a book. And they said, you know what? Go off. You go write it. And this is you starting to form your identity as a PhD student. And with that help, we were able to get this out. It was actually published right as I was transitioning from the second year of med school into the PhD. And the lesson I learned from publishing this book is that in some ways, writing is a lot like medicine. We were able to take the book back, and more importantly, through the work of some of our journalistic collaborators in India, publish newspaper articles, magazine articles, TV documentaries, documentaries that were shown to engineering students in the thousands in India that bring some of the lessons of this disaster and tell the stories of families who lost their loved ones. So this is a gentleman, Dhirubhai Mehta, and his wife, Mohini Ben, who had shared their story of losing a 3-year-old son with us. And Dhirubhai was very sick at the time of our book release in India, but he said, no, I'm gonna come and I will help light a lamp at it. And so he and his wife were actually 2 of the guests of honor at our book release in India. And he passed away shortly thereafter, but he said to me before that, I know now why my son died. And they prevented us from knowing for 25 years, but we were able to find this out. And so the lesson I took away from this is that writing in some ways does what medicine can do. It can close open wounds. It can provide kinds of closure and healing when people are suffering. The other lesson I learned in my PhD time is a little bit different, and it has to do with openings, and that's what I want to talk to you about for the second half of my time. So this is the story of becoming a physician anthropologist here over the past 8 years. So when I started my PhD work, I immediately knew I wanted to focus on something where a clinician could provide a unique perspective, something even another social scientist might not be able to research. And so for me, that was sex-selective abortion. This is a map of the ratio of girls to boys born in India in every district. And the areas that are yellow, orange, or red have less than 900 girls for every 1,000 boys. The reason for this is that since the 1980s, families have increasingly used ultrasound to detect sex prenatally and to abort girls and choose to have only boys. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but the outcome of people doing this on a mass scale is that you see a drastic skewing of the population. And this is this has been illegal in India for 25 years now, and it's talked about in the newspapers. So this is like a graphic from the Times of India that kind of, you see these things come out every time there's a new government statistic. For me, this project actually started when I was doing the field work for the first book. So this is a gentleman, I only have a grainy photo of him, but he was 93 at the time, one of my grandfather's oldest friends, and I was sitting across from him on his porch in India, and he said to me, the next time you do a project, let me tell you what the biggest problem facing India in this century is. We don't allow our girls to be born. And I hadn't heard much about the phenomenon at this point in 2006, but I started looking and it was everywhere. In fact, TV hosts were talking about it. There were fairly gruesome ads on the sides of buses and billboards put out by the government. And it turned out there had been a lot of research done on this, a lot of it crunching the numbers, but a lot of it getting at why people were doing this practice. All that being said, what I found during my first couple of years of PhD research here was that there was a gap. Our understandings and interventions had reached a kind of impasse. When it came to the public health campaigns trying to discourage people from practicing sex selection, we had this pattern. So for those of you who can't see in the back, this is this is real life size. It's about 6 foot tall in the Ministry of Health in the state where I did my research, Gujarat. And it's a picture of a smiling girl saying, do these eyes full of feelings and the innocent face discourage you from committing female feticide? And so this is the idea that obviously sex selection is a bad thing to do, which, by the way, I clearly agree with. But all of the campaigns against this are premised on the idea that this is obviously a bad thing to do. People are ignorant or misogynistic, and we just have to either educate them or tell them to be better people and love their daughters, and everything will be okay. On the flip side, as I said, we have a lot of good, rigorous research on this, but because it's such a stigmatized issue, because it's so legally sensitive, being illegal for the past 2 decades, all of the research can only ask people questions about why they like sons and why they like daughters. And as a reason, all of the research focuses only on the question of why. And I think what we need is a different way of seeing things. And that's the way I feel that a clinician anthropologist can offer a new perspective. So in my research, what I ended up doing was I started far away from the families that were getting it done, and I started far away from the government interventions that some people have looked at. I said, what is the place that nobody has gone that I have a unique entry into as a clinician trainee? The clinic. And so I started shadowing, essentially, was the start of my research. And I hung around until, as my advisor likes to say, people got tired of mistrusting me. So this was a process of about 9 months where I wasn't collecting much data. I was just building trust with the doctors and the brokers who are getting this service going in the black market. So thank you, Penn MSTP and Penn Department of Anthropology for the financial funding to make that possible, because it's hard to burn a year during graduate training. But I spent a year, and that paid dividends over the next 9 months when I was essentially able to observe clinical activity at one clinic that had recently stopped offering the service and one that had recently started. And through the clinicians who had the most to lose, build trust with hundreds of families. With the families, I would then go out to their farms, to their offices, to their homes, and while we were flying kites, cooking dinner, watching badly dubbed Hollywood films, we would have genuine, honest conversations about their experiences of sex selection. And I had a chance to also spend some time shadowing government officials and get a sense of what was going on. And so I won't go into all the details of what I found, but the basic idea is that rather than this moralistic kind of education or awareness-based model that says, here's what we know to be true, here's what we know you should be doing, now maybe you should start doing it, the idea is to start with the ground reality of how people experience the pressures that make them pursue sex selection, and to try to tailor all of our public health and awareness interventions around that. And this is where I think writing can do something fundamentally different from the clinical practice of medicine, which is, but something fundamentally compatible with all kinds of medical research and medical thought, which is opening up new things, opening up new ways of seeing, opening up new answers, but also opening up new questions. Because it's when we ask different questions that we actually start to see the world in a new way. And I think this is what I hope to do in my future career as a physician anthropologist. I very much want to be healing patients on a one-to-one basis. And at the same time, I want to be working in medical anthropology at the intersection of social science and medicine to focus on issues of medicine and inequality. This is actually a word cloud that the Society for Medical Anthropology recently created on what is medical anthropology to you. A lot of interesting stuff in there. If you just Google medical anthropology, it's what comes up. But in closing, I'll leave you with a thought, lest this seem like a kind of solipsistic promotional ad like late night TV for myself. I really adhere to the Tom Stoppard credo, which is that I don't think writers are sacred, but words are, and they deserve respect, because if you get the right ones in the right order, you might nudge the world a little. So with that, I want to say thank you to both sides of Penn for supporting me for the past 10 years. Thank you to you for being here, and I'm very happy to take questions. And sorry, thanks to my partner, Trudy, who is in the audience. And these 2 degrees are probably more her achievement than they are mine, given what she shepherded me through. So thank you. Okay, with
Please.
that, yeah.
So again, my voice is it was an excellent presentation. It's interesting that all the presentations were about medicine in some fashion. I wanted to ask you a different question, though. Is that, what is it like being at one place for 10 years? They're just interesting, like your experience.
So it's, I will say I'm very bittersweet, this being my last 3 days living here in Philly, at least for the foreseeable future. It's been an incredible community here. I mean, I started in 2009, so I actually ran, in the elevator coming up here, I ran into one of my classmates who's now a second year attending. But it's bittersweet because I've built up an incredible community of people. And just to be able to walk almost anywhere in the hospital or med school and see people, when I was on MICU, my resident said to me, "How do you know everyone?" I'm like, "I've just been around a long time, I lurk." But I will say it's been incredible to have that on a personal level, and more institutionally, to see Cheryl, for example, talk about Solidarity Week and see what that looks like. I think some of the ideas that I've had in conversation with people who are graduating this year would have been almost unimaginable in 2009 when I came into med school. So it's really incredible to see the way Penn has moved with the times, and I really hope for the next 10 years we'll continue to move in that way.
Can I ask you one other thing?
Of course.
Final question is that sometime in the future you come back for an alumni weekend, what class will you identify with?
Oh, yeah, that's, I guess I'll be 2019. I have a soft spot in my heart for 13 as well. Also 17, because that's when my MD PhD classmates graduated. So I guess my answer is whatever's most convenient.
So I've actually read your book, as you know, and it's a powerful book, and you're an exceptionally talented writer. And when you were talking about immersing into the culture, it sort of reminded me of Charles Bosk, who many of you know is a professor of sociology here, and for his graduate work, immersed himself into an unknown university program in Chicago, a surgical program, and I think that was the basis of his thesis work. And you have the ability potentially, as you face rigorous training coming up, to potentially do something similar to that. Have you considered chronicling your sort of training in medicine to keep up your writing skills as you're sort of working 80 hours or less a week in an internal medicine program?
Certainly, this actually goes back to one of the first questions we had, which is how do you keep the flame going? And what I hope to do when I'm an intern working no more than 80 hours a week is no matter how tired you are, no matter how busy your schedule, I think there's always time for field notes, is the anthropologist's credo. There's always time to dictate notes to yourself. So that's the anthropological thing that I hope to do during residency.
Fantastic. The cover of the book, as you know, has the Agnew Clinic on it, for those of you who don't have the book. Anyway, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great work. Sandra Walton matched at the internal medicine program at MGH is a graduate from our cell and molecular biology group in the laboratory of Chi Dang. Sandra already has a first author publication in Cell, a first author textbook chapter in Williams Hematology, and a first author review article in the Annual Review of Cancer Biology. Sandra intends to enter the physician scientist track in HEMONC, a trajectory which will certainly be the start of a successful career as a physician scientist. Sandra was the fastest female Philadelphian at the 2012 Philadelphia Marathon, and in the summer before matriculating to Perelman, kayaked 350 miles down from her home in upstate New York to Manhattan.
Yeah.
Now, she will discuss how acid suspends the circadian clock and hypoxia through the inhibition of mTOR. Now, for the record, I attempted to read this paper, and I have concluded that I need to stick to gallbladders and hernias, but she's going to make it so that I can understand it. Hopefully, I look forward to this talk, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back. So this is the title of my PhD thesis. This work was about how the circadian clock, the molecular timekeeper in cells, is disrupted in cancer as a result of the inherent acidity of tumors being inhibitory to a key protein called mTOR. Just have a pointer or just advance? Oh, just advance, okay. Oh, it's that, okay. Okay, that's okay. But rather than give exclusively a basic science talk today about, protons and molecular oscillations, I'm going to try to give a more zoomed out perspective on my work and my journey here at Penn, albeit with many of the same sorts of words, at least in the title, simply because I can't resist. So who am I? So I'm a basic scientist, a laboratory scientist. I'm drawn to and interested in the fundamental biology we still don't understand. But I'm also a clinician in training, a resident in a few short weeks, so motivated to care for my patients and improve their health. So I'm a physician scientist then in training. And the power, I think, of dual clinical and scientific training is the ability to recognize clinical gaps, so limitations or unknowns that basic science can fill. But for me, I think the power also works in the opposite direction, that as a basic scientist, my growing clinical experiences allow me to more readily recognize the clinical applications of the observations and discoveries, intentional and unintentional, that you make in the lab. And for me, that's really what's exciting about basic science. Because it's at such a fundamental level, it has the potential to have implications in realms of clinical medicine, even beyond those which motivated the original investigations. And my belief in the power of dual clinical and scientific training is shaped by my experience in the MD-PhD program, but not just through my own research, but more so through witnessing the incredible science of those all around me in laboratories all across campus. So when I started medical school, I was convinced I wanted to be a doctor, but I soon felt the allure of science, its elegance, and took a deep dive, first into chemistry and then into cancer biology in labs across the country, including 2 years up in Boston in a translational lung cancer lab. So by the time I arrived here at Penn, I was sold on the idea of a career as a physician scientist and was seeking the training to get me to that goal. I also was interested in studying this, metabolism. So could we understand the ways in which cancer cells generate and utilize energy and building blocks in ways distinct from normal cells to identify targetable vulnerabilities? And one of the key regulators of metabolism that was particularly captivating to me was the circadian clock, which brought me then to the laboratory of Dr. Chi Dang. So circadian rhythms are cycles in behavior and physiology with a nearly 24-hour period. And in particular, these rhythms serve to time metabolic activities to appropriately coincide with patterns in things like nutrient availability and sleep-wake cycles that are ultimately arising from the day-night cycle. And the molecular basis for these clocks is a series of interlocking negative feedback loops centered on the core heterodimer clock BMAL. So clock BMAL, this transcription factor heterodimer, binds to EBOX consensus sequences throughout the genome, including those in its own negative regulators. So as it drives its negative regulators up there, paracry and reverb, those negative regulators feed back to inhibit clock BMAL at multiple levels, setting up then circadian oscillation and clock BMAL activity, and thereby directly or indirectly the circadian oscillation of thousands of transcripts in a given tissue type or hundreds in a given cell line as shown here, with each horizontal line being expression of a gene across that time course. And this supports then oscillations in proteins and enzymatic activities, metabolites, and biological processes, many of which have a role in metabolism. So what was intriguing to me was, despite the fact that there's a clock in nearly every cell in the body, and that the clock then governs many processes important to tumor physiology, little was known about the state of the molecular clock in cancer. And that was particularly surprising because at this point it was well appreciated that metabolic rewiring is a prominent feature of solid tumors. Indeed, one of the main drivers of metabolic rewiring in solid tumors is hypoxia, or low oxygen tensions, found in these solid tumors. Indeed, solid tumors are particularly harsh environments for a cell, featuring some of the lowest oxygen tensions in the body. And these low oxygen tensions stabilize hypoxia-inducible factor transcription factors that then carry out a transcriptional program that profoundly rewires metabolism, increasing the flux of glucose, carbon to lactic acid, contributing to another hallmark metabolic feature of the tumor microenvironment, its remarkable acidity. So given then the fact that this hypoxic response that plays out in tumors centers on a regulation of metabolism as the clock itself does, we wondered if there might be crosstalk between these two pathways, such that perhaps the clock in its homeostatic metabolic program is altered or even suspended in order to allow the hypoxic response to dominate, to appropriately confront the pressing hypoxic challenge. So I'll just summarize for you kind of the results of these investigations. So here you can see the normally high amplitude in blue circadian oscillation of a reporter construct for a circadian gene. And in hypoxia, that amplitude of oscillation is very much suppressed. And what we eventually came to understand is that this profound suppression of the clock is mediated by acidification, which is a byproduct of that hypoxic switch from aerobic respiration to anaerobic glycolysis. And indeed, what we learned doing RNA sequencing every 4 hours over a 2-day time course was that acid is sufficient to disable the molecular circadian clock in the transcriptome that it normally sets in motion. And so I'm not going to show you the data, but I'll just tell you that what we eventually learned is that this suppression of the circadian clock in hypoxia by acid is due to a potent inhibition of mTOR complex 1, the target of rapamycin, which is a key regulator of metabolic processes in cells, in particular, a key regulator of translation. And so essentially what you have is that in hypoxia, the circadian clock is shut down through an inhibition of translation of clock proteins. And one of the surprising things for me in the course of this work was that although we didn't set out to do so, we actually ended up gaining key insights into fundamental regulation of mTOR signaling, again, this key regulator of metabolism. And so mTOR complex 1 is normally activated on the surface of lysosomes, the intracellular organelle that plays a role in recycling in cells. And what we noticed about these lysosomes is that in acidic conditions, they remarkably disperse to the periphery of cells. And given that that spatial redistribution of lysosomes with mTOR on its surface was sufficient to disable mTOR signaling, we realized that in contrast to the prevailing model, the immediate upstream activator of Rheb is likely not lysosomal, but instead is on a non-lysosomal endomembrane. So in other words, what the overall thrust of this work is that in hypoxia, you have a switch to anaerobic glycolysis that acidifies cells and drives lysosomes to the periphery of cells, separating bound mTOR from its upstream activator, thereby shutting down translation of clock proteins and disabling the clock in hypoxia. But what does all this mean? So admittedly, what I've told you so far is very much at the basic science signaling cell biology level. But the science that excites me is the kind of science that takes those basic discoveries and runs with that up the rungs to translational applications. And I think the MD, PhD training that we receive allows us to do that and do that fearlessly. And indeed, there are several translational applications of this work that are ongoing in the lab, and I'll tell you about just a couple. But I think these efforts are now being pushed forward through my former lab mates and newer lab mates' efforts. And I think that that's actually one of the really satisfying things about being in science and being a student here, is being part of a larger effort and a greater arc than your own efforts. And so I'm going to skip, actually, for the sake of time, these first two translational applications, but I'll talk about this second one just because it's kind of an intriguing possibility. And one of the main obstacles, I think, in cancer therapeutics is trying to target the cancer cells and hinder their abilities without harming normal tissues. And so given the fact that the clock governs 10 to 15% of the transcriptome, many of which could be potential drug targets, it's intriguing to think that you might be able to rationally select times of day to take advantage of the dysynchrony that's generated through disruption of the clock and hypoxia to achieve a better therapeutic window. And then the last translational application that I think is perhaps most exciting is that during the course of my PhD work, through collaboration with a lab at Hopkins, the Powell Lab, we were able to appreciate that mTOR signaling in T cells has the same kind of sensitivity to pH that we had seen in cancer cells. And so this raises the really intriguing possibility that the acidic tumor microenvironment is inhibitory to T cell anti-tumor immune function, given the importance of mTOR signaling to immune cell effector function. And so that in turn suggests to us several strategies that could be useful adjuvants to increase the potential of immunotherapy in solid malignancies. And then I think for me, though, perhaps the most appealing thing about science, and especially basic science, is that when you start with a question and you follow the data and keep your eyes open along the way, you end up in places you didn't expect to end up. And for me, that's exciting because then you have to constantly be learning new techniques, new fields, being creative, getting a hand from collaborators and colleagues. And one of the gratifying things about being here at Penn is that I've witnessed many times that play out, and I've received a lot of help along the way from numerous people who are always willing to share what they know. Whoops. And so, again, in a few weeks, I'll be starting as an intern in medicine up at MGH and hope to follow that with a fellowship in oncology. And for me, I definitely want to be both a clinician and a scientist. On one hand, to do my best to help patients within the bounds of their current circumstances, and then ultimately to try to change what's possible. So in terms of my PhD work, there's many people to thank, but just to be brief, first and foremost, my advisor, Dr. Chi Dang, and all the members of the lab. My thesis committee was also always terrific and very helpful here. Celeste, Simon, Brian Keith, Todd Ritke, and then John Hoganash. And then, as was already mentioned, Skip and Maggie from the MSTP program are also integral to this work and my journey. Thank you.
Questions? I recognize on the one metabolism slide the Krebs cycle, and I sort of got like a PTSD thing from medical school. It was right here. And after that, I lost that. But let me ask you a more philosophical or global question. You were an attractive candidate, clearly coming out of college. You probably had a choice of a lot of MSTP programs. Why Penn? Why did you choose Penn?
Yeah, so for me, it was the fact that I didn't feel like I was compromising on any front. I felt like it was a great medical school, and there were lots of fantastic research labs to consider. And yeah, I just felt like,
Good fit for you?
yeah, that was it.
Well, obviously, it's been very, very productive. And just, can you elaborate for the audience this fast-track concept and what that means, and when you make that commitment, and how you somehow simultaneously in one residency, you become board eligible in internal medicine, start a lab, and do an oncology fellowship, and all of a sudden you're a principal investigator? Does that all happen? How does that work exactly?
I would love to know as well.
So
yeah.
you make that commitment now, or you go up, you're an intern, and then they select you? Or how does that work at MGH?
Yeah, it's a little bit variable program to program, but like at MGH, it's not it's not coded as a different residency, but like when they describe the class, we're listed as physician scientist track people, and so yeah, we have the choice to short track to 2 years or take a full 3 years for residency before going on to fellowship. So I think I'm going to start at least thinking that I want a short track, to eventually get back in the lab sooner. But what I appreciate is that we have the flexibility. If I feel like I would benefit from another year just to feel more confident in my clinical abilities, then yeah, they let you have that choice. So.
Is it sort of an internal recruiting mechanism? If they commit to you, do you think the intention is to bring you onto the faculty at Harvard, or pretty much you can take your skill set back to Penn or anywhere? How does that?
Yeah,
I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, so the physician scientist tracks are also quite variable in medicine, at least from place to place. So certain programs guarantee you a fellowship outright. Other places like MGH don't outright guarantee you a fellowship, and so you're in a track, and you certainly maybe have as best a shot as anyone, but there's no guarantees. So, but even in the programs where you do have a guaranteed fellowship slot, like at UCSF, you the different ones make different commitments to how much they support that transition. I know like Yale supports that transition a lot to junior faculty, but yeah, I think it just depends on, like anything in science, a lot of luck, how you do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Questions? Thank you. Now, it should be obvious that it's clear that why I have probably one of the best jobs here at the Perelman School of Medicine. I think that these presenters today were obviously very impressive. We're incredibly proud of every one of you and the great work you've done. Look forward to your graduation and your fellow graduates this Sunday. So thank you very much. I would also point out that as alums of this medical school, you can rest assured that the foundation of excellence that you laid down during your time at Penn has been soundly preserved by our current students as we advance medical education into the next century. So have a great day. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. Thank you all.